going to start with prayer. And for the prayer, I'd like you to have two hands ready to reinforce and illustrate some of the words in the prayer. So can I see everybody's hands? And you might like to all put your videos on as we say this prayer. Lord God, we invite you to be with us and to speak to us this evening as we explore how to grow as disciples through coming together in all ages, through being Christ-centered, through being creative, and through being hospitable. We pray we can celebrate all that you call us to be tonight in our churches, in our messy churches, and throughout our lives. Amen.
Amen.
So let me just introduce Jane and Aike, who are beaming in from somewhere down south. And they're part of the Messy Church national team, and they're going to lead us through the first session. So Jane and Aike, thank you so much for joining us. The wonders of Zoom, it makes it so easy for all of us to meet together this evening. So let me hand over to you and invite you to share a little bit more about Messy Church and how to be more than a craft club, how to be an intergenerational discipling community.
Well, good evening. It's really lovely to be with you tonight. I'm zooming in from London, and we've got a bit of a hot evening here. Jane, where are you coming from today?
I'm in Nottingham, so somewhere between the two. Not quite halfway though.
And we'll just introduce ourselves briefly before we get going. So my name is Aike, and I took over the Messy Church ministry lead role in January. But I've been involved with Messy Church since about 2010, when I first started a Messy Church in South East London. And after 7 years, I moved on and I took on a diocesan role with Southwark Diocese as a children and youth advisor. And that's the role that I've come to now. And I've just started with a team of a local church in East Greenwich. We've just started a Messy Church Goes Wild in March this year. And we had our fourth one yesterday. Jane, would you like to say a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jane. I'm the training and development lead in the Messy Church team. I joined BRF back in January 2021, but I've been a local Messy Church leader for over 11 years now. So yeah, I'm responsible for looking after the training element and working on new projects. And I'm going to share a little bit more about Messy Church Goes Wild, which Ike's just mentioned, which presents you with some new opportunities to reimagine your messy churches, or perhaps a new way to start if you don't already do a messy church.
We wanted to start with a poll question, but we can't. The poll function isn't working tonight, so we're going to do it live instead. And we've got two questions for you today. And our first one is, how are you feeling about ministry with children, young people and families? And if you could put your response in the chat, that would be really helpful. So right now, does it feel like it's a walk in the park? Is everything going really great? It's been really easy post-lockdown. Do you feel as though you're just about keeping your head above water? Do you feel like you're hanging on to a cliff edge right now? Or maybe you're from a church that have no children or young people. Do pop your answers in the chat if you can. That would be really helpful. We'd like to get a bit of a feel of how the Zoom is feeling right now. So yeah, A, it's a walk in the park. B, I'm just about keeping my head above water. C, I'm hanging on onto a cliff edge. D, we have no children and young people. Yes, there's quite a few cliff edges coming in there, or just about hanging on. Thank you for your honesty. There's a few churches which don't have children and young people at this point in time. I want to celebrate the A's. Have we got any A's out there? Anybody who's finding it a walk in the park? Because we can learn from you right now. Okay, let's have our second question. How well do you know Messy Church? Is it something, A, have I been involved with one for years? B, maybe we've just started a Messy Church or are about to start. C, maybe you do something similar. Or maybe D, you're curious to hear more. So we'd like to know, are you already involved? Are you just getting going? Do something similar, or you want to hear a bit more? Fabulous, we've got a whole mixture there, a whole mixture. That's brilliant. So some of you have done it, but not currently. Some of you are keeping going. Excellent. Fabulous. Right, well, for those of you who don't know much about Messy Church, Isabel was brilliant, and her opening prayer with all the actions gave us all the values of Messy Church there. So just to start with, Messy Church is a gift to the church, really. It's church, but not as we know it, and it crosses all denominations. And the beauty of Messy Church is that it can be taken to your different contexts, and whether that's a different denomination or a different setting. But the thing that we really, really emphasize to all our Messy Churches are the values. And we have 5 values. And Jane and I are just going to run through those 5 values for you. We've got a little, here we go, a slide there. And the number 1 value is that everything we do in Messy Church is Christ-centered. So it's more than just a craft club. So whether it is from the moment the person walks through the door and is welcomed, to the activities that happen, the activities in a really good practice Messy Church should be based around the Bible story or the Christian theme that you're trying to get through, that you're trying to convey during the session, to the celebration, and to how we serve the food. We really want to make sure that Christ is at the centre of all we do. Our second value is that it's all age. And I know tonight we're specifically thinking about intergenerational discipleship. And one of our Messy Church values is that it's a place where all ages can be together. And it's different from the model where you might come to a traditional church and the kids get taken out for age-appropriate sessions during a service. It's basically the whole old and young are worshipping together throughout the whole of a Messy Church session. I'm going to hand over to Jane.
So the next value is creativity, which is probably the one we're most well known about. So Messy Church uses hands-on activities to explore Bible stories, to reflect our God of creativity, and to give people a chance to play together. We think that's really important. Creativity means that Messy Churches are always open to new ideas, imaginative and flexible to change anything in essential to meet the needs of any particular context, season or person. It involves learning with different parts of our brain, body and senses, and brings our whole person into worship. One of the reasons Messy Church appeals to me is because I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I remember stories and Bible stories through the activities that we've done. I make connections with my eyes. The creativity is not just limited to the activities we do, but sort of permeates the whole way through. So being creative in the way that you welcome people through the door, creative in the worship, every element of a Messy Church aims to be creative. As I said, we have an element of celebration in our Messy Churches, which is what we call our worship time together. Jesus is such a dynamic, engaging figure, and we want the people that come and get to know him as that. And Messy Church tries to get across how engaging and life-changing and awesome he really is. It comes along, Messy Church celebrates who God is and what he's done, but it's a place to celebrate individuals and families. It means noticing each individual person's place in God's bigger picture. It says you matter, you are loved just as you are. It involves marking significant events within the family of the church, and recognises that God is concerned with those too. And they may be joyful events such as birthdays and weddings, but they can often be times of sadness and lament like death and illness. And Messy Church aims to make space during our time of worship for everyone to mark what's important for them before God. Another element that's really well known of Messy Church is our hospitality, most obviously expressed in the meal that we share together, but really extends right from the beginning in the welcome that people receive as they come through the door. And really what we're seeking to do there is mirror the hospitality of Jesus himself in the way that he went out to people. He welcomed everyone, young and old, provided food for the hungry, and enjoyed food with others that was provided for him. So that's really about the hospitality. So I think that's a whiz through the values, Aike.
Yes, and so during the pandemic years, many Messy churches had to close and couldn't meet in person. But something that the message that we said to them was actually keep looking at your values. And during that time period, some Messy churches were very creative and started delivering activities to families in a bag. Others did doorstep visits and having a chat on the doorstep when you were able to do that. Others, when you could meet in larger groups outside, started to meet outside. But once again, holding on to all those different key values. And over the years, Messy Church has done a couple of pieces of research to see what the impact is on people's discipleship journey. There are two significant reports. I'm just going to talk about one of them, and I know one of our speakers later on is going to talk about the other. But I want to just introduce you to the report that was done called Voyage of Discovery. And we've got a lovely video that's about 3 minutes long that gives you sort of the key findings of that research, because tonight's topic is about how do we disciple in an intergenerational way. And then once we've watched that video, I'm just going to flesh out about a few of those areas that I mentioned in the video. So, is that good?
Yep.
How do you make disciples in Messy Church? We took a team of researchers, the National Messy Church team, 24 local Messy churches, and set off together in 2019 with generous amounts of prayer, guided conversation, reflective practice, laughter, hard work, and cake. Then journeyed together through a global pandemic. The Messy churches piloted 6 different approaches to making disciples. 3 approaches involved working with the families. 3 involved working with the team. New all-age materials were developed, and new insights came from each approach. We were talking about God, and it made it feel as if God was listening to us. Rather than craft with a bit of Jesus, it's become more about Jesus with a bit of craft. I've learnt that it's much harder to talk about the Bible than I thought it would be, but it was really cool tonight. What are some of the headlines? If you want to make disciples in Messy Church, it's about some very simple decisions. Decide to be a community of reflective practice. Make space for reflection in every aspect of Messy Church. Decide to value quality, not just quantity. Value the significance of the small and the single. Decide to journey together. We found there's something profound and effective about togetherness. More than anything, decide to be disciples and to make disciples. Because we're church. That simple act of deciding to be on a lifelong journey with others to follow Jesus is the one action that will lead to greater depth. Oh, and cake. Eat lots of cake.
So that gives you a flavour of that research project. We actually do a Zoom masterclass where we spend 90 minutes looking at that in a lot more detail, and there'll be some coming up in July if you wanted to go and delve into that a bit more. But I'm just going to briefly whiz you through and flesh out some of the things that were described on that video. First of all, it talked about that there were 3 approaches for discipling families and 3 approaches for discipling the team. the three approaches that they took for discipling families was, one was a messy basics course was developed, a bit like a Christianity Explored or an Alpha course, but for the whole family to do together. The second one was to do a social action project together as a way to disciple messy families. And then there were some of the groups decided to do messy extras. For example, a Messy Church intergenerational home group that met in between the main messy meetings. The three approaches for discipling the team included things about maturing the team. So how do you develop your team and go deeper in their discipleship during your planning meetings? There was also a project on peer mentoring. So different members of the team, you might have a more experienced Christian on your team mentoring a newer Christian on your team. And the last one was all around growing the young leaders so that they can grow into their ministry roles. And from that film, you might have noticed there were 4 key learnings, and I'm just going to run through those and just give them a little bit more detail and some examples. So the first key finding was around reflective practice. And I think the first thing to note is that this whole project wasn't about adding lots more activity, but it's all about giving space to some of the activities that you already do, space to listen as a team and to reflect. And something that we often suggest to teams is that you use the following questions. What went well today? Even better if? And then the third question is about, where did we see God at work today? What God conversations did we have? And Messy Church teams discovered that when they started asking those questions of each other and of what had actually happened at the Messy Church, rather than meeting and just ploughing straight into organising the next one, they started to realise and be much more intentional about seeing where God was at work. And it's about getting into the habit of spotting what God's already doing. And then as you share it with others, it builds that sense of, oh, God really is at work here. So I'm just going to tell you the story of June. Now, June's Messy Church, June features on our communion masterclass, and she's done a little film for us. But in her Messy Church, they decided to celebrate communion. And they first did that on their 5th birthday. And then a year went by and they thought, well, it's our 6th birthday at Messy Church, let's celebrate communion again. So they did. And for the first time ever, they asked the question, what God conversations did you have? And then it turned out that 5 different members of the team had had a God conversation with a parent as a result of doing the communion. So they decided to follow those people up, and it led to a group of 5 mums then meeting together midweek. So they'd drop the kids off at school, and then they'd meet together with this group of 5 mums, and they took them through some, I think they did an Alpha course together, and they started Bible reading together and praying together. And then out of that, 3 families got baptized. And that's a lovely, lovely story. But notice that deepening of discipleship came from a simple question. Where did we notice God at work? And if they hadn't asked that question, they then wouldn't have followed up those conversations that didn't then lead to all the other groups happening. So it's about, part of it is that sort of decision about, actually, it's not, we're just Messy Church when we gather once a month. It's about thinking that we are Messy Church throughout the whole month. And if you're a Messy Church leader, remembering you might be in other situations where you come across the same families. So you might also volunteer at the toddler group. And so go thinking, I am Messy Church at the toddler group. It might be that you are a grandparent picking up at a primary school gate, and that you'll recognise some of the families that come along to your Messy Church there. It might be when you're out walking the dog that you bump into somebody from your Messy Church and you have a following conversation. I know that the place where I most had the chats once, when my kids are now teenagers, so there was a time when I was the mum at school gate and all those kind of other drop-offs, but the place where I probably have my best God chats now are the supermarkets. And I would always bump into one of the Messy Church dads because he'd always shop at a similar time and have these sort of follow-up conversations. So yeah, it's about just being really intentional and challenging your team to be intentional about where do you notice God at work. And I think with this, it's worth noting, for those of you who are hanging on to your cliff edge, you might need to decide to give up doing something else to make Messy Church a priority and make it a deeper and richer experience. So that's quite a challenge, because you might be one of the people here who's also running the toddler group and the junior church and the Messy Church and the after school club and things like that. So it's trying to work out and discern where best you can add value and not spread yourself so thinly that you are feeling like you're hanging on at the cliff edge. The second main finding I wanted to point out was quality versus quantity. You know, it's really great when Messy churches are large, and you know, there's a Messy church in Dulwich that got featured on Songs of Praise, where they started during October 2020, and they have like 120 people come. It's phenomenal. But we want to really celebrate that it's equally great when you have the small numbers, because actually the quality of conversation and those God conversations will flow much more easily when you've got fewer people. You can go to a much greater depth, and you will see people moving along in that discipleship journey rather than just pitching out an event where there's loads of people. You can really build community between the different families. And I know I'm having to get used to that. The Messy Church, I used to run a church in South East London. You know, we'd get between sort of 80 and 100 people at Christmas. And now I'm running a Messy Church Goes Wild. We've just started, and we plan it once. The church I'm working with has 3 parishes, and there are 3 churches in one parish. So we plan it once and we deliver it twice in the outside space of, they're lucky to have 2 different primary schools. We do it 1 week at one and 1 week at the other. But at the moment, we probably might have, well, yesterday we had in the heat wave, we had 4 family groups come. The most we've had is about 8 or 9 family groups come. So that's much smaller numbers, but actually we're getting to know them much quicker. And we're just at that start of that process of really trying to build a community in that space. So yes, recognize that actually quantity isn't always the best thing, and maybe a better, rather than counting all the people that come, maybe count the number of God conversations that you have during a Messy Church session, and maybe that could be your measure of where you're seeing God at work and how discipleship is going. And it's really important to share that with your team and say, look, I had a holy moment with this mum just now, you know. So it's not always conversations just to say, because, you know, sometimes kids have their wow moments or whatever, they don't necessarily have the words for it. Or it might be that we used to have a mum that would arrive and she'd get to Messy Church and she had 2 autistic sons, and she would come into the Messy Church and just burst into tears and go, I feel at home here, because she knew that her sons would be accepted. And that for me is a holy moment. So she had found her sanctuary, but she's not a Christian and she didn't know how to word it in more kind of God speak. The third thing I want to flag up is the one about journeying together. And it's interesting, the research found out that there's something really profound and effective about togetherness. A Messy Church is a shared journey. You really can't run one alone. You do need a team. It might be a small team, but there's something about being really intentional, about being very deliberately intergenerational with the adults and with the children. And that might be, you know, at every level, thinking about, well, how am I going to plan this? Have I got any young people on my planning team, or am I asking for some of their opinions and ideas, even if they can't make the planning meeting? And that's one way to really build that sort of intentional, intergenerational model. And the other thing is about maybe encouraging some of your more mature Christian families to walk alongside a family that's really new to all of this. And it works best if, you know, they have other connections, like they all go to the same school and things like that. But it's one of those things, you as a leader cannot disciple every single family that comes through, but you can disciple your team. and in turn equip them to walk alongside somebody else in your messy church. So if you think about it, Jesus had his 12, and then he had his top team of sort of about 3, didn't he? So he didn't try and disciple all the 5,000 that had come for the picnic. He worked with a close group, and they in turn worked with others. So think of that in terms of your messy churches as well. Think about who you can disciple well, who in turn can go and disciple others. And I think some messy churches right now are really finding it hard because they've lost a lot of their volunteers during the lockdown. And they're like, oh, how can I do this? I don't have enough volunteers. And I think part of that is thinking about how can we journey with the group that come and involve them in making it happen. So I think sometimes churches can fall into that. We're the provider and we're going to provide messy church, and then we're going to go away and do our traditional church on a Sunday. How can, if you've got a very small team, as people come through the door, can you say, hey, I really need some help. Can you help come and serve the drinks today? Or do you know what would be really brilliant if you could help tidy up afterwards, and just involve everybody so that people start to get that expectation that when they come, they not only do they participate in the activities, they've got agency in what happens in the gathering. So that's something to bear in mind. And the last thing was about, the research talked about decide to be disciples and to make disciples. So that is literally, it's a mindset thing, and it's about actually, if you want to see discipleship happen at Messy Church, you need to very much be on that journey yourself. And as you go on your own discipleship journey, being really open and sharing that with others, your team and things like that, and really think about who can you personally apprentice along the way. So in the New Testament, we've got examples of apprenticeships. We've got sort of Paul and Silas, and eventually they go their separate ways and Silas is ready. But you know, who are the people in your messy churches that you can come alongside in your leadership roles, particularly if you're getting to the end of that cliff edge and you're thinking, I'm not sure if I want to run messy church anymore. Who are you already gearing up to walk alongside you, who might take over some of those roles, which then, if you do need to step away, will make that process a lot smoother. So those are the four top findings from that research. I'm going to hand over to Jane now.
So I wanted to chat to you about Messy Church Goes Wild. So rather than talk at you for too long, we've got a brand new video which we shared for the first time at conference. So you're one of only a select group to see it, and it will explain it a lot better than I can. So
Messy Church Goes Wild is the movement within Messy Church which aims to encourage messy churches to meet God outdoors, love the natural world, experience a sense of awe and wonder, and to be more eco-aware in all we do, both inside and out as gathered and dispersed church for the good of the planet.
Messy Church Goes Wild has made me think about how I can use my knowledge and my tools learnt here for creation and protecting the environment, whilst also bringing others closer to God as well. So use it as an outreach as well, I think.
Messy Church Goes Wild connects to all the 5 core principles behind Messy Church. It's an expression of creativity to reimagine and adapt the Messy Church shape to an outdoor context, using the natural materials we find around us.
My favourite bit about Messy Church Goes Wild today was doing the activity with the sand and the footprints and making pictures out of natural resources.
Exploring and understanding the natural world is one way to celebrate God's creation, plus it hugely benefits our own well-being.
I feel a real connection with God when I'm outside in nature, so I feel much more drawn to God when we're doing this kind of thing.
As Christians, we believe that this fullness of life is found ultimately in Jesus Christ. Messy Church Goes Wild aims to host spaces where Jesus Christ can be counted outdoors in the cathedral of the natural world.
I think Messy Church Goes Wild has made me think about how great God's creation is.
Messy Church Goes Wild expands our concept of hospitality as it prompts us to transform our behaviour as human beings and make room for other species on the planet. Young people can and do lead the way for whole households to change their behaviour to a more sustainable lifestyle. That's why our Messy Church Goes Wild resources have been devised and tested by teams, including Messy Church leaders, consultant scientists, children and young people for an all-age audience.
The groups from 2 years old up until retirement age, everyone gets involved, and it's been really great that we've been able to do that.
So Messy Church Goes Wild takes place whatever the weather. We've done 5 pilot sessions so far. Each time the weather has been completely different. We've had lovely, beautiful sunshine, and we've had exceptionally windy, like it has been for today's session. And so far, people have engaged with the sessions, and we've had a good amount of people. So whatever the weather, take Messy Church Goes Wild outside.
Get ready for a wild adventure.
So that's our Horn Church team down in Essex, who are one of 10 churches that are piloting something we're calling the Messy Adventures at the moment. So the whole Messy Church Goes Wild is kind of a movement within Messy Church. It sort of goes back to prior to Aike and I arriving with the organisation, back to sort of 2017, 2018, when Jane Ledbetter, who some of you may have met before, was really feeling a pull to deal with plastic waste and pollution, and Lucy felt there might be a different way to meet a different group of people on the edge. Could there be a group of people that we could connect with through the natural world, and through meeting God through the natural world? A lot of our more recent thinking around Messy Church Goes Wild is in response to reimagining about how and who and where we are church. The pandemic has meant that for large parts of the last couple of years, it's been safer for us to be outdoors rather than indoors. There's the Rewilding the Church within Fresh Expressions, which is about how we achieve growth and regeneration, and very much the desire for environmental and ecological change being driven by young people. There was a relatively recent report between Youthscape and Tear Fund called Burning Down the House, which stressed the concerns of young people in the church, with only 1 in 10 of them thinking the church was doing enough to respond. So what we were passionate about was letting those young voices be heard, and help them to lead and influence adults. So the Messy, I think you saw on the back, we've got a book available, which sort of goes into some of the theology around why caring for creation is what we're called to do, and it's got a couple of sessions in there if you're familiar with Messy Church sessions, but focusing on the adventures which were highlighted in the video. It's a set of 12 units which are contain lots of creative ideas for you to take your Messy Church outside. We've got quite a strong scientific focus and environmental science in it as well. We've worked with a team of consultant scientists, lots of lovely themes and different approaches. So you'll be very familiar with doing Messy Church in a church building. These are not just about, well, let's do it outside. There are some activities to do that, but there's one about going and taking your Messy Church elsewhere and doing it somewhere else outside. And there's one that leads you, there's an approach that can lead you on a trail around your neighbourhood. I just wanted to give you some highlights of the feedback that we've had from the pilot so far. So there's a lot of material in the units. One of the pilot churches said that they've got 3 sessions out of 1. So there's plenty of material there. One of the other pilots said that they'd had 36 people come to their first Messy Church Goes Wild, 2/3 of whom they've not seen at any other church service or event that they put on. So there is evidence there that it does appeal to a different group of people. We know about this issue of threshold, people coming across and into church buildings, so maybe this removes some of that barrier. And there's also the added bonus of Messy Church being out there in the community, us being seen as a visible presence in the community, which also helps to draw other people in. One of the pilot churches had not converted their regular Messy Church into a Messy Church Goes Wild. They carried on doing their regular Messy Church, and they'd added in the Messy Church Goes Wild. And so it effectively planted a new worshiping community. So it had some people from their regular Messy Church come along, but again, it had drawn in completely new people. And some of the pilots are using it as like an added extra. They're popping it on in the school holidays, sort of in lieu of like a holiday club potentially. There's lots of evidence that there's real, genuine intergenerational conversation around some of the themes and issues that are in the material. Children and young people very much leading the conversation, because as we said, it's something they're really passionate about. But because of the science element in the adventures as well, there's been lots of observations of the children going, oh, I've done this in science at school. So that's really interesting there. Although there are lots and lots of activities in the material, feedback is that the teams are using less activities, maybe 3 or 4 as opposed to the 8 or 10 that we sometimes recommend, because everything takes longer outside, which is actually one of the aims of the project, as you meant in the video, having a sense of awe and wonder in the great outdoors. How often we're walking somewhere and we're walking to get somewhere, we're not walking and noticing what's around us. So taking time to stop and admire God's creation is what we're trying to achieve, and it certainly seems to be working. The bonus for you is you haven't got to prepare quite so many activities as well, so if you're feeling stretched as a team, that's probably attractive as well. And the other bonus for the team, from a team perspective, is as well, quite a lot of the pilot churches are reporting that it's attracted new people to come and serve on the team. So if the idea of cutting and sticking and gluing or jumping around and waving a parachute didn't appeal to volunteers before, maybe getting involved in something different outdoors might. There was one that said they got a forest school teacher in their congregation that wouldn't have naturally felt drawn to volunteer with Messy Church before, but now that they're doing Messy Church Goes Wild, they said, great, I'm in. And again, it might be an opportunity for you to invite younger people to form part of your planning and leadership team. The units are going to be published on our website, and they're going to be completely free to download. We're very much aiming towards end of July, early August at the moment. We're just sort of collating lots of bits of feedback together. We're then going to be taking it on the road to showcase it to Messy Church leaders. We've got 2 planned in at the moment this year, and we'll be doing another 2 in the spring. I appreciate these 2 aren't going to be super convenient for your location. So at the moment, we've got them booked in with the team at Horn Church, and there's another one in Gloucester in September. But obviously, if you think that this is something that would appeal, we're still looking for 2 locations for next year. So if you think it might be something you might be interested in, or you would be willing to host us to come and do a roadshow, we'd very happily journey up to Scotland and do something to show Messy Church Goes Wild to Messy Church leaders or potential Messy Church Goes Wild leaders in your area. I think that's us.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane and Aike. That's been really, really helpful. I was really struck, actually, that just by being part of Messy Church and being involved in Messy Church is part of our discipleship, but then how we can be discipling each other in our teams, and then the opportunity to disciple and grow faith in all those who come to our Messy Church it can happen at all those different levels, which is really, really exciting. So thank you so much for sharing those key principles and examples. I'd like now to bring Fiona in, who works for the Church of Scotland in the research unit, but she was also a missionary from the Church of Scotland to work in partnership with the Church Army, and actually did some of this very key formational research on Messy Church. So I thought, if we're having a Scotland discussion about Messy Church, we'd be foolish not to ask Fiona to come and share what she was struck by in the research that she did, and how that connects to, for all of us, to help grow, develop and strengthen our messy churches as discipling communities. So Fiona, we'd love to hear from you. Over to you.
Great, thank you. It was great to hear from Jane and Aike about the Voyage of Discovery research, because I was involved in the start of that, and I heard how it had gone, and I heard about the animation and what my research colleagues looked like in that animation. It was great delight at seeing how they were going to be drawn. I stopped working with Church Army just at the time that was in greater development. I was involved in the research that came before that was published in January 2019, just in the end of the before times, perhaps when we didn't really have any idea what was coming around the corner. What we were asked to find out was basically, did Messy Church make disciples? Because there were people who thought that this was a nice craft club, but really. So we went to find out, well, what are Messy churches actually doing? Is it a craft club on a Sunday afternoon, or is it actually a new worshiping community, a congregation, in its own right? And how are they growing disciples, or are people just having a bit of fun and some cake? So we looked at this in. Let's go forward. Right, there we go. It was a 2-year project, and we looked at this in lots of different ways. I'm a statistician, so I looked at all the numbers from a questionnaire, and did lots of graphs and statistical tests, and you can read that report if you would like to. It's on the web page with the summary report. Other people that I worked with conducted focus groups with leaders and interviewed them. We also did a fabulous, I've been really interested in hearing Jane and Aike talking about how it was all done together, and bringing young people into your team and your leadership groups and your planning. Because one of the things that Claire Dopra did was to basically run a Messy Church at the Church Army offices in Sheffield, and use that to ask parents and young people and quite young children what they felt about Messy Church, what they were learning about Jesus, and the like, actually from doing creative things. And they had food and all the rest of it. But they made things, they painted things. There was pottery, and the summary report that's on that website has some of those pictures. So one of them was something as simple as somebody was quite new, painting the picture of a sign, and they said, "This is the Messy Church is like a sign. That there is Jesus, and this is how you find him," and just straightforward things like that. So it was research actually working with people effectively during a Messy Church session. And it's also important to know why people don't stay at Messy Church. Not everybody stays and loves it and all the rest of it. So we were able to do some interviews with people who had left to find out what it was that had made them leave. Were the kids getting older and there wasn't something for them to they weren't able to stay? Did they just hate the whole thing? What was going on? So there's lots of different parts to the research, a lot looking at it from kind of many different facets of what was going on. And they're all on that the web page if you want to look at them in a lot of detail. So what we found in summary was our question about does Messy Church grow disciples? I was sitting at my computer late at night. I confess I was working on this quite late at night, and I suddenly ran a statistical test that was very, very significant. It was very, very important. Showed a big difference in what was going on. And I remember thinking, does Messy Church grow disciples? Heck yes, because it was such a big difference in what was going on. So it reaches families that are new to church. I think Jane or Aike mentioned something about a whole lot of new people coming, and that was just the Messy Church Goes Wild. But people, leaders have been asked, and they say about 40% of the people who've come have no church background whatsoever. So they've never been to a church. It's never been part of their lives. It's 40%. And another 20% or so maybe have been to church before. Maybe they were parents when they were children, but haven't been at all recently. So that's 60% of people coming are new to church things, and I can't think of anything else that we do that has anything like that anything like that way of reaching out to people who would normally come in to our church. We asked the leaders kind of how they were growing disciples, and 81%, so that's like 4 out of 5 of the leaders, said that they saw lives changed through their Messy Church. They saw discipleship happening. Disciples were being grown, whether that was serving together and in teams, bringing on the young people to be part of those teams, whether it's like through just one-to-one conversations, those God conversations, wherever they are, supermarket or school gate or whatever, or some places have done small groups with either with adults or with families as a whole. So it definitely grows disciples. But I think the thing that was most important when I was going through all this analysis of all the numbers that I had, it didn't matter where you were. Messy Church could work in rural areas, urban areas, deprived areas, less deprived areas. I actually questioned our data people who'd carried it out, because I said, this can't be, something's not right here. This can't be this well balanced and things. They said, no, it's all right, it's all right. But the thing that made the difference, the thing that made Messy Churches grow disciples was basically, as Jane and Aike have said, was, do you want to? Are you running Messy Church as a fun activity on a Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, but really it's not proper church. It's a fun thing instead of Sunday school, and people need to come on a Sunday morning. This isn't proper church. Why are you running Messy Church? Are you doing it as an outreach thing, or do you intend it to be church? Do you want the people there? As we said, that lady with the autistic sons, she came in and just, I feel safe here. But do people come to find church, and that is their church, or is it not really in proper church? Is somewhere else? That was the one thing that made the difference, and boy, it made a difference. So it basically kind of came down to, if you want to grow disciples, you have to mean to, you have to want to, and you have to be creating the environment for that to be the case. It was quite remarkable. Everything came out like there'd be no difference here and no difference there, and suddenly, oh goodness, do you want to do it? Big difference in growing disciples. And another thing is modeling new patterns of leadership. I was interested in the Messy Church Goes Wild video, that it was a man that appeared to be leading that group, which is quite unusual for Messy Churches. Usually it's women leading, so I was amused, or I noticed that. And what we find is Messy Churches are developing as churches in their own right, and maturing in that way as well. So these are all fabulous reasons that we found through these interviews and surveys, these wonderful things that are happening in Messy Churches. And we would love to see this in all kinds of congregations, in the Church of Scotland or other places. We would love our Church of Scotland congregations to be reaching families who are new, growing disciples, and so on. But Messy Churches are definitely doing that. But there's always a but. We also found that, as has come up, I think, in a couple of hints, that leaders are overstretched and feeling under-supported. Creating that culture of discipleship is demanding. It's not something that's easily done. And people often might feel vulnerable and under-resourced. We heard of lots of people actually spending their own money to get resources for Messy Church because their church wasn't providing enough and things. And you know, there are people who will say, well, it's not proper church, is it? Or you know, it's not as important as other things that go on. And yet it may be one way that you're reaching out to new people who would never come into a traditional service on a Sunday morning. So it's not all wonderful, but there are lots of resources and things that can help. So what we found really was that being intentional about discipleship was the important thing. That some people said, you know, did Messy churches need to meet every week? And some leaders went a very interesting shade of green and white at the thought of having to run Messy church every week. But it didn't show up as being a thing that was important. A quality event, perhaps monthly, depending on what people could do, was more helpful. And that, as I'm sure we all know, forming real community is messy. It's not straightforward. It's not simple. And that the whole church needs to play its part, whether that is in being part of the Messy Church leadership team, whether it's supporting that leadership team, and maybe that means asking them or freeing people up to step back from other things. The same person is arranging all the flowers and running Messy Church. Maybe there's somebody else that can arrange the flowers, or something like that, so that people are able to be engaged enough in Messy Church. I'm just going to actually no. There's a slide of a visualization of the data, but I don't think it's going to be helpful at this point. It's in the notes, the work. But that's the important thing. Do you mean it? Do you want this to be church? Do you intend it to be church? Then disciples will be made. If you don't really, then yeah, they probably won't be. Yeah. So basically, because the results from this were so positive, then my colleagues went on to research, to do the voyage of discovery work and take that further.
That's great and really, really helpful, and kind of it shows the research reinforces what we've been talking about, that actually Messy Church is significant in building up and discipling people. I'd like to invite Paula now to join us and to share what she's been doing and what she's been experiencing in a very practical way. And I think we're looking at kind of 3 phases of life, aren't we? Because we're thinking back to before COVID, when we were in another and different world, during COVID, when some things had to stop, some things carried on, and then after COVID, things have often been very different. So Paula has been asked to just share a little bit about how she's experienced that sense of discipling through Messy Church in those 3 seasons.
I'm sort of going to include a little bit also about some of our folks have said that Messy Church was new to them. So just to fill you in on our own experiences, the fact that most of the people who come to Messy Church had little or no church connection. The vast majority of them did not go to Sunday school when they were younger. So I felt that we were kind of living with a fallacy that we were missing a generation or two. Because let me tell you that my experience of meeting with people through funerals and through all other avenues has been that we are missing 3 or 4 generations who have never been into a church building for any reason whatsoever. So they have no concept of who Jesus is or what he's done. They've never heard the stories that we are familiar with and which we had grown up with. And doing chaplaincy at the school showed me that many children had no concept of Christmas and that it had anything to do with Jesus and that he was actually a real person. So Messy Church is discipling because when the adults are attending with these youngsters, when they come in, they are hearing the stories from the Bible for the first time. It's brand new to them. And God is making a connection with these people through the avenue of Messy Church. Yes, I have had some of my folks who have said Messy Church is a craft club for children. And I've challenged them to come along to see the difference about what church is in a different context. And I have to say that one or two have taken up the challenge. And interestingly, that one time pre-COVID, we had been doing a messy church on Daniel, from the book of Daniel. And one of them said to me afterwards, was that the actual story from the Bible? And I said, yes, it was a retelling, but it was factual. And they had admitted that the part of the story we were looking at was to do with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. And they had no idea that Daniel wasn't a part of that. There were aspects of the Bible that they had misunderstood or not read properly in the first place. And these were people who had been church all their lives. So messy church, is it discipling communities? Yes, in a very different way, depending on how your messy church is formed, its leadership, its target audience, because people who are involved in the leadership of messy church in my town group and in our country group have been brought together in very vastly different ways. Let me explain. Our town group, we have gone with people who are solidly a part of the church setup. They're reliable, they are faithful people who are on the whole know their stuff. They are trusted, committed Christians who are involved in sharing the gospel and have a passion for it, rather than just receiving it on a Sunday. They have been interpreting the Bible passages that we look and study together as we're planning. And as they share, these people are active in teaching the gospel. So they are discipling people. They are not just sticking things down or building things or doing. They are actively learning on their own. And those things that they are learning, they are bringing into the setting of messy church. We have had people involved who, part of the church, who were retired, not able to, or felt that they were not able to contribute to church life. But you always heard them enthusiastically talking about the things they were doing with the grandkids when they were coming to visit. Well, these people are now involved in a lot more of the table work. They can organize things, they can resource these things, and they spend the time at the tables with the activities, and they interact, and they have a different patience that comes with being grandparents that some of us might lack. And they can connect with these people in a very different way and have conversations and answer questions whilst things are being stuck and made. Now, the discipling is happening in additional ways in the country church because the team there called upon some who had never had a connection with church before to be a part of the leadership. Some teachers and some classroom assistants, partly because one of my major leaders is a head teacher, have engaged and been involved with all sorts of outside clubs. And so they were brought in as a part of the team because this is something they can do. They can interpret and they can make use of the material, because sometimes we needed to change what the activity was slightly to suit us. Now, I have to be honest to say that I was not entirely comfortable with this approach. Having people teaching Bible stories who are not necessarily Christians or not having a personal faith, a bit off the track for me, I have to confess. However, God has been faithful. These people who are teaching and reading this material for the first time and reading the Bible for the first time are learning, they're preparing for their groups and for the activities, and they are coming into faith. And they do it by the best way, because sometimes by teaching is how you learn stuff better for yourself. So our country messy church has been discipling the teachers in a whole different way. And that has had a whole different effect on the community that is our messy church. So is messy church discipling? Yes. It's not conventional church ways, but most of the people would not come on a Sunday and sit in a pew or on a chair for any traditional form of worship. Are they hearing scripture? Absolutely, yes. It's being spoken, portrayed in many different ways. Scripture is being depicted and reinforced just like it would be on a Sunday morning by the choice of hymns or the choir piece. Yes, it's being done in a different way, just like when Jesus found different ways of communicating and connecting with people who were different. The message is being reinforced through music, crafts, activities, rather than a sermon. And this is coming from someone who truly believes in the integrity of preaching every week, or I would have not have been doing that for the past 25 years. Are these people learning to talk with God and to God and listen to him? Yes, absolutely. Prayer and engaging with God is done in so many different ways, but I have no doubt that folks are engaging in worship. They are building a relationship with God. That means Messy Church is not a craft club. It is an avenue that God is using to connect with and teach his people, both those who attend and those who are practitioners of it. Messy Church is a valid form of church and worship. It's bringing Jesus and people together. It's growing Christians and making people more like Jesus, which is what discipleship is about. However, this is the difficult bit. Because I firmly believe we are not called to be successful, but we are called to be faithful. In Messy Church, we may be sowing seeds that others will water. We may be fortunate even to water the seeds that others have planted in the past, in which case we may be at the stage where we are discipling these people. However, God will grow these people in their faith. Just we have to provide the avenue for them to be able to learn and to connect with God. And that can happen through Messy Church. A disciple is someone who imitates their teacher, and so growing and understanding and maturity. And the goal is that people will connect and become more like Christ. Now, we had a really good Messy Church in the town, and I can connect with something that Aike was saying at the very beginning. Our town one pre-COVID was 60 to 80 at a session. However, when we got to those numbers, we found there was a difficulty with connecting individually. It was more like fielding people through activities and doing that sort of thing. So we were even beginning to talk about, do we maybe run our sessions 2 weeks and actually have a registration so that people have to book in, and actually run smaller sessions for the town church? Then COVID hit, and that became more of a difficult. Our country church, they're dealing with smaller groups. They're dealing with about 15 to 20 people, family groupings. But it meant that when we went into COVID, there was a whole different effect. Our town church found it very much more difficult to connect with our Messy Church families. And in many aspects, we failed. The country church, because they had a Facebook page which they ran, they were a lot more tech savvy than some of us were. They managed to connect with the people. They would drop envelopes through the door with a little package, say, we're going to be on a Zoom, we'll do a 30 to 40 minute session. These are the additional bits you need. You might need some felt tip pens, you might need a little pot of glue or something, but everything was delivered. And then they came together. As such, the country Messy Church continued all through COVID. We did find some ways to connect with our town ones by going to the local park and doing some stuff outside when we were allowed to do a little bit more, but it was very much more challenging because we didn't quite have the same connection, and trying to contact 80 odd people was a lot more challenging. As we're going back, the Messy Church in the country is doing very well. They've connected with new people. Some of the people who were the practitioners, who were the teachers of it and weren't necessarily Christians in the first place, have come into faith, and they are growing, and they are already targeting other colleagues and friends to come in as a part of the team. So that in itself is growing, and they are doing something. They are evangelizing. It's a word we don't like, but they are evangelizing and doing stuff that we would be afraid sometimes, having spent years and years and years in the church. The Messy Church in the town is having to start all over again, but we're starting with, I think, with a different perspective, in that we can now sort of look at it and say, right, this is the potential for what it will be. This is the problems we encountered with numbers and losing the personal interaction that we were having with people. This is how we're going to solve it with individual groups and a bigger team to work with. We lost many of our older people who were working with the tables and such like, and some of them have not been able to come back post-COVID, but there are new people behind them, and it takes a bit more energy with everything else that's happening in the Church of Scotland at the moment to sort of work with that. But there are people who are just hungry to do that and wanting to do it because they know the difference it has already made in people's lives and the potential for what it can do in the future. So if anyone asks you, is Messy Church a craft club? Absolutely not. Don't try and argue with them. Challenge them to attend and to get involved, and then they will see for themselves. And does Messy Church disciple? Absolutely. It is a discipling. It facilitates discipling, but it also challenges us. Some of us who might have been a bit more happier with sitting back and letting other people do those things. It pushes you into getting involved, and God makes good on his promises through the whole of it.
Paula, thank you so much for so convincingly assuring us that Messy Church creates disciples and giving us those wonderful examples. But if you could really share, particularly focus on this discipling part of Messy Church, how is that happening in your situation? Are there new things that we can be doing to help be more intentional about that discipleship part, about growing disciples and growing faith in our Messy churches? And the second question you may get or may not get onto is how can we keep them as fully and equally intergenerational?